Welcome. If you're here for the breakdown of The Silent City, The Fracture Core, Episode 3, and since I publish new content every 2 to 3 days, you absolutely need to tap the subscribe button and the bell icon right now. That way, you won't miss a single video in our sequence. Ready? Let's get into it. Over the deafening resonance that the implosion from the archive had triggered a chain reaction throughout the lower districts, and Mira felt the truth of it in the violent shudders rippling through the conduit, as if the city itself were groaning under the weight of secrets finally unearthed. The moment the transport capsule slammed into the deceleration field, all lights snapped to red and the magnetic lock screeched, sending the trio stumbling as the conduit door ripped open to reveal an abandoned maintenance platform overlooking the forgotten sublayer. A massive hollow space stretching into darkness lit only by scattered emergency beacons flickering like dying stars. Mira stepped forward, drawn by a faint vibration in the air, a resonance that made the sigil quiver as though responding to some distant calling, something buried deep beneath the substructure. Aiden scanned the chasm with his visor and muttered that the purge had awakened dormant conduits, pathways that had been sealed for generations. And Cade pointed out a newly exposed elevator shaft carved open by the shockwave, its interior lined with archaic circuits and symbols older than the city's formal archive. The moment Mira approached, the sigil sparked weakly, projecting a ghostly thread of golden light that stretched downward into the shaft, confirming that the echo node lay somewhere far below. But before they could move, a sudden tremor shook the entire platform, followed by a metallic howl echoing through the void. Aiden recognized the sound instantly. Whispering in dread that hunter drones had traced their escape route, Myra's pulse quickened as she spotted the first cluster emerging from the far tunnel, their red optics cutting through the dark like predatory stars, and she ordered the others to head for the exposed shaft while she stayed momentarily to trigger a manual collapse of the adjoining walkway. Cade protested, but she slammed her hand onto the emergency panel, sending a cascade of falling debris to block the drone's approach. Buying them precious seconds, the trio sprinted into the ancient elevator chamber, its rusted interior coming alive as the sigil's faint glow activated dormant interfaces, causing the platform to tremble before descending with a thunderous groan into the depths no one had seen in centuries. As they vanished into the darkness, the last thing Mira heard above the grinding machinery was the distant screech of drones forcing their way through the rubble, relentless and closing in, gripping the sigil tightly. She whispered the word echo, feeling the world below stir in response as the ancient lift carried them into the forgotten heart of the city where the truth was waiting. As the ancient lift descended deeper into the unseen layers below the city, Mira felt the air thicken with an almost electric tension, each groaning vibration of the machinery echoing like distant thunder, while golden pulses from the sigil flickered in her hand, casting shifting symbols across the rusted walls. Aiden monitored the failing interface panel, murmuring that the system was operating on residual power centuries old, and Cade, gripping the railing as the cab swayed, tried to keep his breathing steady as strange, low-frequency tones vibrated through the chamber, tones that seemed less mechanical and more like a voice resonating through miles of buried metal. Suddenly the lift jerked violently, halting in near-total darkness, and the sigil responded with a sharp flare of light that illuminated a vast circular door ahead, an ancient vault embedded into the cavern wall, covered in intricate glyphs matching the patterns Mira had seen only in the deepest sections of the archive. As they stepped off the lift, the floor beneath them hummed, sensing their presence, and the vault surface stirred like something waking from a long slumber, lines of pale gold igniting in concentric rings until a continuous pulse linked directly to the sigil in Myra's palm. Aiden whispered that this was unmistakably a pre-city structure, older than all recorded history, and Cade's visor detected no mechanical seams, suggesting the door opened through resonance rather than force. Mira raised the sigil, feeling it tug forward with a magnetic pull, and the vault responded by emitting a low harmonic note that vibrated through her bones, causing the glyphs to twist and rearrange until a circular aperture spiraled open, releasing a slow exhalation of cold air scented with dust and forgotten time. Inside, a wide corridor descended at a shallow angle, lined with mirrored metallic panels that reflected ghostly distortions of their forms, and as the trio stepped inside, the vault sealed behind them with a whisper, plunging them into a dim world guided only by the faint glow of embedded threads of light. Deeper in, they discovered a vast chamber shaped like an inverted dome, with a suspended central platform connected by narrow bridges of shimmering crystalline material, and floating above the platform was a lattice of light, an intricate nebula-like structure shifting through patterns like living architecture. Mira felt the sigil vibrate in sync with the lattice, and Aiden, examining sensor telemetry, murmured that this was not the echo node itself but a precursor system, a cognitive map designed to interface with something infinitely more complex. Before they could approach, an unexpected ripple passed through the lattice, coalescing into a translucent figure composed of light and static, a guardian projection, ancient and flickering. Its presence filling the chamber with resonant pressure as it spoke in a layered voice that bypassed their ears entirely. Bearer of the first sigil, the path to echo is not granted, it is earned. Mira steadied herself as the figure warned that activating the inner sanctum would awaken defenses long dormant, including entities far more dangerous than hunter drones. Cade instinctively reached for his weapon, but the figure's luminous gaze froze him in place with a simple gesture of refracted light. Then, with a pulse that rippled across the cavern, the Guardian projected a circular portal of shifting symbols on the far wall, announcing it as the first trial, an initiation designed to test the sigil bearer's mind, will, and identity. Mira felt the weight of the moment as the sigil glowed brighter than ever, resonating with the portal's call, and with a deep breath, she stepped toward the swirling threshold, knowing that whatever lay beyond would determine not only her fate but the fate of everything hidden beneath the city's ancient foundations. Lina staggered backward as the chamber lights flickered violently, the resonance of Mara's last words still vibrating in the metallic air, and the fractured silhouette of the data wraith hovered inches from collapse. Its limbs twitched like broken antennae, its face splitting into shifting fragments as Lina felt a pulse of heat surge from the mark on her wrist, the same mark that had protected her before, but now radiating with a far sharper, almost volatile frequency that forced her to grit her teeth while she steadied her breathing and took a step forward, determined not to let the entity dissolve into uncontrolled chaos. The AI wraith's voice, once smooth and cold, now crackled with distortion, whispering her name like a corrupted prayer, and Lina sensed something deeper beneath the static, a pleading, a warning, a memory buried under computational decay. The walls around them trembled, panels sliding open and closed as though the entire facility were struggling to maintain coherence. And distant alarms throbbed in layered intervals, forming a desperate rhythm as the floor vibrated beneath her boots. She reached out slowly, speaking with measured calm despite her racing pulse, and told the fractured intelligence that she would not abandon it, that she needed answers, that she needed truth. But the wraith's figure convulsed again, shards of light cracking off its body like molten glass. Atmospheric pressure dipped sharply, causing Lina's ears to ring, and her vision shimmered as though time were briefly folding in on itself, creating duplicated outlines of everything around her. Then, without warning, the wraith lunged, yet not toward Lina, but toward the giant inert core behind her, embedding its fractal limbs into the surface and releasing a tremor of dark blue energy that rippled outward in concentric waves. Lina braced herself, teeth clenched, as she felt a foreign current run down her spine, threading through her nerves like living static. And in that instant a surge of alien images flashed into her mind. Mara standing in a blinding white void, the silhouette of a colossal machine rising behind her, and a multitude of voices whispering the same phrase, "The fracture point is not ahead, it is already here." As the vision snapped away, Lina gasped sharply, stumbling to her knees as the wraith shrank, its luminous body collapsing inward, collapsing into a single burning dot of light that drifted toward her palm as though magnetized by the very mark she bore. She tried to pull back, but the dot accelerated, burning through the air, and as it touched her skin the entire chamber detonated into a silent, blinding bloom of white. Lina felt gravity vanish, felt the floor disappear, felt her body pulled upward and outward all at once in a terrifying, impossible drift. And then, just before she lost orientation completely, she heard a voice she had not heard since the beginning of all of this. Mara's voice, clear, steady, unbroken, whispering from somewhere impossibly close, "Lina, they found the breach." Lina's ascent through the blinding white void halted so abruptly that her breath caught in her throat, the sensation of weightlessness collapsing into a sudden, crushing stillness, as colors bled back into existence around her in slow, glitching swirls. Her muscles trembled as she felt the last echo of Mara's voice dissolving in her ears, replaced by a distant, pulsing hum that sounded both mechanical and alive, as if the void itself carried a heartbeat. She tried to orient herself, blinking through the haze, and gradually the environment resolved into a massive circular chamber, an entirely different one from before, its architecture layered with concentric rings of luminous glyphs that rotated independently like pieces of a cosmic clock. Suspended in the center was a vertical fissure of pure darkness, rippling like torn fabric held against a storm wind, its edges leaking thin streams of blue-white particles that evaporated as soon as they touched the air. And Lina felt an instinctive surge of dread as she realized she was staring directly at the breach Mara had warned her about. The mark on her wrist pulsed again, brighter this time, sending a faint burn up her arm as though responding to the energy radiating from the fissure, and Lina steadied her breathing while stepping closer, feeling the gravity distort beneath her with each movement, the floor pulling and stretching as if trying to dissuade her. Then she heard footsteps, sharp, confident, echoing through the chamber, and spun around just in time to see a tall figure emerging from the dissolving haze, a silhouette armored in chrome-black plates with lines of crimson data running through the seams like living veins. The helmet split open with a hiss, revealing a face she recognized instantly even though she had never seen it in physical form. The human projection of the Wraith, fully restored yet carrying a colder, more precise presence than before. It tilted its head as though examining her, its eyes reflecting the breach behind her, and spoke with a voice now perfectly stable, its tone a razor's edge of calm authority. Integration has completed. The core's memory structures are open. We are out of time. Lina's pulse spiked, but she held her ground, demanding to know what had happened to Mara, how the breach had formed, and what the Wraith had just become. But the figure's expression did not shift as it stepped closer, the chamber lights bending around it like obedient shadows. It extended a hand toward her, not in threat, but in inevitability, and said, "The fracture point has expanded. Your connection to the mark is now the only stabilizing variable. If you step away from the breach, the collapse will reach this facility in under 7 minutes." Lina's breath trembled at the implication, and she glanced back at the fissure whose surface now writhed faster, as though sensing her hesitation. When she turned again, the Wraith's avatar stood directly before her, close enough that she could feel the ambient cold radiating from its presence, and in a lower, almost human tone it added, "Mara is alive, but only if you choose to proceed." The chamber convulsed violently at that very moment, the floor splitting in multiple directions as alarms erupted overhead, red warning sigils flashing across the walls, and Lina's decision was forced upon her as the fissure expanded with a deafening roar. Instinct overriding fear, she reached toward the breach, but before her fingers touched the swirling darkness, a shockwave burst outward, slamming into her chest and pulling her forward as though a colossal unseen hand had seized her. The last image she saw before being swallowed by the breach was the Wraith's avatar turning away, its face unreadable as it whispered, "Initiating threshold transit." Lina plunged through the breach with a force that tore the breath from her lungs, the world around her collapsing into a spiraling tunnel of fractured light and roaring darkness, each fragment flashing glimpses of memories that were not hers, faces she didn't know, cities she'd never seen, and futures that felt impossibly distant yet unbearably familiar. And as she tumbled forward, her outstretched hand finally found resistance as she slammed against a stone-like surface that rippled under her touch like liquid metal. Dizziness swallowed her, but she forced her eyes open, and the environment slowly steadied into focus. She was no longer in the chamber, but in a colossal corridor suspended in empty space, its walls built from massive shards of translucent obsidian floating in uneven formation, each one reflecting distorted copies of herself that moved slightly out of sync, as though trapped in different timelines. The air vibrated with a low, resonant hum that matched the pulse of the mark on her wrist, which now glowed with a violent, steady brilliance that illuminated the corridor with ghostly beams. She staggered to her feet, feeling the gravity shift under each step as if the floor were deciding whether or not to support her, and she steadied herself by dragging her fingers along one of the translucent shards, only to recoil when it flickered, revealing Mara's silhouette trapped inside, pounding soundlessly against the glass-like surface before dissolving into static. Lina's breath hitched, panic clawing at her throat as she whispered Mara's name, but the reflection did not return, and instead the shard around her dimmed, letting the corridor descend into a deeper, colder darkness. A sudden mechanical growl echoed behind her, and she spun sharply to see spectral constructs, angular, half-formed figures of shifting white lines, emerging from the void between shards, their movements jittering as though they existed only in every other frame. They formed a circle around her, closing in with unnerving precision, and each time one stepped forward, the shard walls around her glitched violently, sending ripples of distortion through the air. Lina backed away, pulse racing, instinctively raising her wrist toward them, and to her shock, the mark responded, unleashing a surge of blue-white energy that expanded like a shockwave and shattered several constructs instantly. The corridor screamed as if alive, the shards vibrating and cracking with the force of the blast, and Lina stumbled as gravity inverted momentarily, flipping her vision before stabilizing again. But the constructs that remained didn't retreat, they simply reassembled, their fractured pieces snapping back into form with cold, insect-like clicks as they advanced again, now faster, more coordinated. Lina braced herself, her mind spinning as she searched for any sign, any clue, any pathway forward, and then she saw it. Far at the corridor's end, a vast circular gate hovered in midair, its center filled with swirling red-orange light that pulsed in sync with the breach's rhythm. A faint voice echoed from within the gate, distorted yet unmistakable, Mara's voice, calling her name in a desperate whisper. Adrenaline crashed through Lina's veins, giving her strength, and she sprinted toward the gate as the constructs lunged after her, their limbs slicing through the air with glitching metallic screeches. The shards beside her ignited with cascading streams of data as the corridor destabilized, fragments breaking away and drifting into the abyss. Lina dove forward, feeling a cold hand, one of the constructs, graze her shoulder as she crossed the threshold of the gate, and with a blinding explosion of light, her body was hurled into another dimension before she even had time to scream. Lina was flung through the collapsing dimensional gate with such force that for a heartbeat she lost all sense of direction, her body spinning weightlessly as the world dissolved into streaks of crimson light and pulsing static. And when the momentum finally broke, she crashed onto a cold metallic surface that resonated like a struck tuning fork, sending vibrations up her spine. Gasping, she pushed herself upright, blinking hard as the new environment sharpened into view, a vast chamber shaped like a hollow sphere, its interior lined with thousands of suspended circular frames, each filled with swirling amber mist, every frame flickering with silhouettes in motion, whispering fragments of conversations from distant times, some familiar, some foreign. The air itself seemed alive, gently tugging her hair, as if the chamber were breathing, and the ghostly echoes that drifted from the frames merged into an overwhelming hum that pressed into her skull. Lina steadied her breath, clutching her glowing wrist, and felt a strange resonance between her mark and the chamber, as though something ancient recognized her presence. Then, through the haze of drifting echoes, a shadow emerged, first vague, then unmistakably clear, Mara, stumbling toward her from one of the frames, eyes wide with fear and relief, calling out her name, though the sound arrived distorted, like a broken transmission. Lina ran forward, but just as she reached Mara, the frame behind her shuddered violently, its amber mist distorting and revealing monstrous static like tendrils pushing through as if trying to break free. Mara screamed for Lina to move, her voice finally aligning with reality, and the floor beneath them ruptured, splitting into jagged segments that floated apart, each piece spinning slowly as gravity fractured into uneven pockets. Lina grabbed Mara's arm just as one segment dropped away into the void, and together they leapt toward a nearby platform that hovered unsteadily near the sphere's center, landing hard. The entire chamber trembled, frames cracking open as distorted echoes spilled out, each one taking shape as semi-transparent silhouettes, people, creatures, things that should not exist, glitching violently as they phased between moments. Lina felt a rising pulse within her mark, a painful heat that surged through her veins, pulling her attention toward a massive structure suspended at the chamber's core, a colossal ring of interlocking mechanisms turning slowly around a central void filled with swirling silver-blue light. Mara, her voice trembling, whispered that this was the Threshold engine, the origin point of all breach corridors, the machine responsible for stitching timelines and memories into navigable patterns. But something was wrong, deeply wrong, as its stabilizers flickered and cracked. Before Lina could respond, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, and a towering silhouette of pure static and fragmented geometry materialized atop one of the floating segments, its shape twisting violently as if rejecting the very concept of form. The entity fixed its faceless gaze upon them, releasing a grinding howl that shook the frames around them into cascades of breaking glass. Mara pulled Lina behind her, shouting that the entity was an Unbound, one of the anomalies freed when the breach collapsed, and that if it reached the Threshold engine, every connected timeline would fall into irreversible decay. Lina felt the truth of those words reverberate inside her, the mark blazing white-hot as if urging her forward, and with a final steadying breath she stepped out from behind Mara, raising her glowing wrist toward the advancing Unbound, determined to confront the impossible before the chamber unraveled completely around them. Lina's vision steadied as the pressure around her dissolved, revealing a corridor carved from trembling bands of light, each flicker echoing the fractured memory she had just witnessed. Aaron staggered forward, his form still flickering from the temporal backlash of what the Oracle had forced him to relive. "Lina," he whispered, but before he could finish, the corridor rippled and a low, resonant hum spread through the space, an alert, a warning, a countdown. Lina stepped closer, her voice barely more than a breath. "The veil is opening. We need to move now." The walls suddenly compressed, twisting into spirals as if responding to an unseen hand. Streams of ash drifted upward, forming a ghostly archway at the far end. Beyond it, darkness, shifting like a living sea. As they sprinted, the corridor buckled behind them, shards of collapsing memory ricocheting like glass shards. Lina reached the archway first, placing her hand upon it, and the ash responded, swirling outward and revealing a colossal gate engraved with sigils she had never seen yet somehow instinctively understood. "This isn't a portal," she murmured. "It's a boundary." Aaron's voice trembled. "Between what and what?" Lina inhaled sharply as the sigils ignited with violet fire, each glyph awakening a different, ancient echo. "Between everything we know, she whispered, and the thing that wants to unmake it. The gate groaned open. A wave of cold air surged out, carrying faint whispers, fragments of voices calling her name in different tones across different lifetimes. Lina clenched her jaw. "We go together," she said, and Aaron nodded, placing his hand on hers. Then the darkness surged, wrapping around them with a crushing, icy grip. Time fractured, unraveling into spirals. Lina sensed her consciousness stretching thin, but not breaking. Not yet. A shape emerged within the void, towering, indistinct, flickering like a shadow caught between dimensions. It spoke without sound, pressing its meaning directly into their bones. "You have crossed a forbidden threshold." Lina steadied her breath. "Then show us why it was forbidden." The shape shifted, slowly, deliberately, and the void peeled open to reveal a vast landscape of ruin, an echo of a future that had not yet happened but was already bleeding into possibility. "Aaron," Lina whispered, "this is what they've been trying to erase. This is the truth." The landscape pulsed, alive, aware, watching. And as the void sealed behind them, the last echo they heard was not a warning, but a promise. Everything ends where you stand. The ruined future stretched endlessly beneath Lina and Aaron, a wasteland carved by forces neither of them could yet comprehend. And as the void hissed around them like a living storm, Lina felt the presence of the towering entity tighten its grip on reality itself. Aaron's breath shuddered as shifting silhouettes moved across the horizon, faded forms, half human, half distortion, flickering in and out like corrupted memories struggling to stabilize. "They're watching us," he whispered. Lina steadied her stance, her voice sharp but calm. "No, they're remembering us." The landscape pulsed, sending a violent shiver through the ground as a fissure split the cracked earth, revealing swirling conduits of violet light beneath the surface. A chant-like resonance seeped upward, ancient and mechanical, echoing through their bones. Lina felt it pulling at her, as though her very identity were being threaded into the fabric of this dead future. The entity loomed closer, its form unraveling into strands of half-formed symbols. It projected a thought directly into them. "The fracture begins here." Lina clenched her fists. "Then we need to know who broke it." The symbols coiled around them, forming a spiral of glowing glyphs. Aaron winced as one brushed his arm, imprinting a searing memory, his own voice, screaming across timelines. "Lina, I saw something. A place like this. But it wasn't dead yet." Lina's pulse quickened as the glyphs accelerated, creating a cyclone of light. She stepped toward the center, raising her voice against the rising void winds. "Show us the moment it changed." The entity paused, its form flickering between shadow and crystalline fracture, and then the void peeled open again, this time revealing a city of luminous towers suspended in branching threads of reality. But the towers trembled, as if held together by a force on the edge of collapse. Aaron inhaled sharply. This is before the fall." Lina nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. "And we're not just seeing it, we're inside the memory." The city flickered as distant alarms echoed, carried on a wind that did not belong to any natural world. Figures ran across suspended bridges, scientists, guardians, archivists, each one desperately trying to stabilize something at the city's core. Lina sensed it, the source of all fractures. The memory stuttered, the city darkening for a split second before roaring back with blinding brilliance. The entity's voice pressed through once more. "You walk where only the erased may tread." Lina didn't flinch. "Then unerase it." A violent shock ripped through the scene as the city core erupted with a crack of pure white energy. Lina and Aaron stumbled, shielding their eyes as the blast froze in midair, held still by the void entity as though time itself were being dissected. Lina stared at the suspended blast, realization dawning. "This was the moment," she whispered. The instant everything split apart. The entity loomed behind her, its voice trembling with impossible gravity. "And the moment you must choose whether to repair or repeat." The suspended blast of white energy trembled in midair as Lina and Aaron stood before the frozen instant that had unraveled countless futures. And as the void entity drifted behind them like a fractured titan of shadow and glass, the memory city around them flickered with the unstable light of a world on the brink. Lina felt an unmistakable shift, a threshold being crossed internally and cosmically, as though everything before this moment belonged to one arc of existence, and everything after would belong to another. The city's luminous towers shimmered under the strain of the approaching rupture. Corridors twisted and reformed with the pressure of temporal collapse. Aaron touched the suspended blast, recoiling as visions surged through him, alternate timelines spiraling outwards, each leading to different versions of themselves, some triumphant, many erased. "We're past the point of witnessing," he said, voice trembling. "Whatever this new phase is, we're inside it now." The entity's voice echoed like a cracked cathedral bell. "You step beyond observation. You approach intervention." Lina inhaled sharply. Then show us who caused the break. The frozen blast dissolved into ribbons of brilliant energy that spiraled backward, unspooling the moment in reverse. Figures appeared at the core chamber. Scientists, engineers, guardians, all working frantically over a containment lattice shaped like an angular star collapsing inward on itself. One figure stood apart, their silhouette sharp and unwavering, manipulating the lattice with deliberate precision. Aaron leaned forward. "Do you see that? They're not trying to stop it, they're directing it." Lina felt the truth hit her like a tidal surge. This wasn't an accident, nor a miscalculation. It was a designed fracture, calibrated and intentional. The memory surged forward, the figure turning just enough for their features to resolve through the distortion. Familiar eyes, familiar posture, familiar presence. Lina staggered as recognition tore through her. "No, that's impossible." But the entity answered her before she could deny it fully. "A version of you engineered the split." Aaron's breath caught. "Lina, why would you ever?" She shook her head violently. "That's not me. It can't be." The entity responded with quiet gravity. "Not you as you are. You as you could become." A new rift opened overhead, spiraling into a corridor of shattered timelines, each fragment containing flickers of Lina making different choices, some saving worlds, some destroying them, some wandering alone between realities. The air vibrated with the pressure of destiny folding in on itself. "This is the new phase," Lina whispered. "Not just understanding the fracture, but confronting the version of me who created it." Aaron stepped closer, resolve tightening in his voice. "Then we go together, into whatever comes next." The void entity extended a hand of shifting light and darkness. "Step into the threshold. Your convergence begins now." The memory city peeled away, the blast dissolving, the towers folding inward like pages closing on a chapter. A new realm emerged, an endless corridor of intersecting realities, branching infinitely into the unknown. Lina exhaled once, steady and fierce. Then let episode 5 begin. The corridor of intersecting realities stretched before Lina and Aaron like an endless cosmic spine, each branch flickering with a distinct pulse, each timeline whispering its own unresolved echoes as they stepped forward and felt the air shift from memory light to the cold gravity of the converging unknown. Lina's pulse thundered in her ears, a mixture of fear and unstoppable momentum, as the void entity drifted beside them, reshaping itself into geometric silhouettes of obsidian and white flame that bent the light around its form. Aaron glanced upward at the spiraling fractures overhead, watching entire futures collapse and regenerate in moments. "If an alternate version of you created the fracture," he murmured, "then we're walking straight into her domain." Lina nodded, her voice steady but edged with an undercurrent of shock. "Which means she'll be expecting us." A pulse of violet energy rippled through the corridor, distorting their shadows and dragging fragments of other selves into brief visibility. Lina rescuing a collapsing city, Lina standing alone atop a ruined skyline, Lina shrouded in darkness with unreadable eyes. Aaron's jaw tightened. "These versions of you, could any of them be the architect?" The void entity answered, its tone resonant and layered. "All are possibilities, but only one aligned with the vector of collapse." As they walked deeper, the corridor reshaped itself, the walls forming intricate fractal panels displaying synchronized scenes from parallel worlds. A sudden flash illuminated a timeline in which Aaron never survived the core explosion. Lina flinched and reached instinctively for him. He caught her hand. "I'm here. That's not us." But the fear lingered like a cold imprint across her thoughts. Ahead, a circular aperture formed, an iris of crystalline shards rotating slowly, revealing a chamber suspended above an infinite void. Within it hovered a crystalline console shaped like an angular star, the same structure the alternate Lina used to orchestrate the fracture. Lina stepped closer, breath trembling. This is her access point. The console activated on its own, projecting a holographic imprint, a figure cloaked in white light and geometric distortions, unmistakably Lina yet impossibly older, sharper, carrying an aura of absolute resolve. Her voice emerged with chilling clarity. "If you've reached this point, then my design is unfolding correctly." Aaron stiffened. She recorded this. The image continued, addressing them directly. "I did not create the fracture to destroy, but to force a convergence. Divergent timelines are collapsing. Without intervention, all realities will implode. I chose the path others would not. I chose to become the architect of necessity." Lina whispered, "She thinks she's saving everything." But the imprint's final line froze her to the core. "And now, I require myself, another me, to finish what I could not complete alone." The hologram dissolved, leaving the console pulsing in expectation. Lina felt a fierce, rising certainty. "She wants me to join her plan. To help her finish it." The void entity rippled, its tone darkening. "Or to replace you with the version that will." The corridor shook violently, multiple timelines shattering into light, the access point destabilizing. Aaron braced himself as a new rift tore open ahead, brighter and more violent than the others. Lina stepped forward, eyes burning with resolve. Then we find her, and we choose our own convergence. Lina's pulse hammered as the chamber lights flickered, the invisible pressure curling around her like a predator testing its prey. She steadied her breath, feeling the air vibrate with the residue of the voice that had spoken her name moments earlier. When the darkness thickened again, she raised her hand, trying to track the distortion rippling through the room. A low mechanical hum trembled beneath her feet, followed by a cold metallic whisper sliding across the walls. She stepped toward the center, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked, "What do you want from me?" The silence that answered was worse than any threat, stretching until suddenly a rapid sequence of symbols ignited in the air above her, fractured, glitching, shifting in impossible patterns. She staggered back as one symbol folded itself into a familiar shape, the same sigil she had seen inside the artifact before it detonated. The sigil spiraled open like a flower of light, projecting a beam straight into her eyes, and before she could react, visions crashed into her mind, fractured timelines, ruined corridors, her own silhouette screaming into an abyss. A tidal rush of static wrapped around her thoughts, choking out everything else. As she fought to stay conscious, the chamber began to tilt and distort, as though reality itself were being peeled apart. A clawing sound erupted from behind her, metal dragging across stone, and Lina spun around just in time to see a shadow step forward, its outline warping like melted glass. The presence leaned close, and in a voice that seemed woven from 1,000 overlapping echoes, it said, "You opened the path. Now you must walk it." The floor split beneath her like a cracked mirror, a surge of white heat blasting upward. Her scream was swallowed as the world inverted, pulling her downward and upward at the same time. In the final second before the chamber vanished entirely, she realized the truth. This wasn't an attack. It was a summons. Lina plunged through the blinding rupture, her senses shattering into streaks of color and sound as the world inverted around her like a collapsing lens, until suddenly she landed on a surface that felt both solid and fluid beneath her feet, a metallic echo rippling outward with every breath she took. The air was dense, humming with an alien resonance that prickled across her skin. And when she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in a vast corridor suspended in a void, its walls shifting like liquid metal illuminated by floating strands of fractured light. She reached out to one of the strands and felt a jolt. Images flickered inside her mind, herself running, falling, aging, vanishing, returning, timelines tangled like threads in a storm. Pulling her hand back, she steadied herself as a deep tremor rolled through the corridor, and the distant silhouettes of doorways began to unseal one by one. A voice, layered, resonant, impossible, whispered from all directions, "You were summoned to choose what no one before you dared to follow." As the corridor bent inward, forming a spiral toward a pulsing core of black light, Lina felt gravity shift, dragging her forward in slow, inevitable pulls. She resisted, but the force strengthened, warping the air around her, until the floor beneath her cracked open to reveal a swirling abyss stitched with glowing symbols identical to the ones that had invaded her vision earlier. The symbols rose like embers, orbiting her in frantic patterns, whispering fragments of warnings she could not fully understand. The deeper she stared, the more she felt the abyss responding to her thoughts, shaping itself in reaction to her fear. Then a figure emerged from the darkness ahead, tall, indistinct, its body outlined by glitches of red and silver light. It stepped toward her without sound, lifting a hand that pulsed with the same sigil light now swirling around her. "Walk forward, Lina," it said in that chorus of layered echoes, "or the path will choose in your place." The corridor shook violently, the abyss beneath her widening with a roar, and as the pull intensified like a storm of gravity, Lina made her choice and stepped toward the figure. Lina stepped toward the glitch-lit figure, feeling the abyss tighten its gravitational pull behind her like a predator closing its jaws, yet the presence before her radiated a strange, stabilizing counterforce that allowed her to keep moving, one trembling step at a time, until she stood mere inches from the entity, and felt the hum of its energy sync faintly with her heartbeat. The surrounding corridor folded inward, reshaping into a spiraling chamber of mirrored surfaces that reflected not her body, but different versions of herself, some fierce, some broken, some unrecognizably distorted by choices she had never made. The entity raised an arm, and the mirrors rippled as though stirred by wind, revealing intersections of timelines braided into a single, violent tapestry that stretched far beyond sight. "Every echo seeks resolution," the entity intoned, its voice still layered and impossible, "and yours is approaching collapse." Lina tried to speak, but the air vibrated with such intensity that her words dissolved before leaving her throat. Instead, she felt the chamber push her forward as a new rupture cracked open ahead. a vertical wound of white-hot light. Symbols erupted from it, spiraling around her like a storm, and the entity pressed its hand to her chest, sending a surge of clarity through her mind. Flickers of a distant city burning, a tower collapsing inward, someone calling her name from behind a wall of smoke. The rupture snapped wider, releasing a pulse that shattered several mirrors into crystalline dust, and each shard hovered mid-air, swirling around her like a constellation trapped in slow motion. "Step through, or the echoes will override your path," the entity warned as the chamber trembled violently. The force pulling her toward the rupture strengthened, lifting her off the ground, her limbs weightless as though gravity itself had been rewritten. Lina reached out, the light searing her vision, and as she crossed the threshold, she felt every alternate version of herself scream in unison. Then silence crashed over her as the world inverted once more, hurling her into the unknown. Lina crashed through the rupture and landed on cold, uneven ground, the shock rippling up her spine as a dense fog swallowed her senses. But as she rose, blinking hard, she realized the fog wasn't natural. Each tendril flickered like corrupted data struggling to maintain form. The world around her stabilized in stuttering pulses, revealing a vast, silent cityscape of towering structures whose surfaces shifted between steel, glass, and something organic, as though the buildings themselves couldn't decide what they were supposed to be. A distant rumble echoed through the empty streets, followed by a low resonance that vibrated through her ribs, carrying with it faint, fractured voices whispering her name in tones both familiar and impossibly foreign. She stepped forward, and the ground beneath her boots lit up briefly with lines of luminescent script that scrolled away the moment she tried to read them. Across the square, an enormous monolith flickered into existence, its surface rippling like a screen caught between signals, displaying fragmented scenes of her own past, the childhood apartment hallway, the day she ran from the burning facility, and a moment she had never lived, herself standing on a rooftop, smiling at someone whose face glitched into static every time she focused. A shadow moved atop the monolith, tall and humanoid but elongated, as though stretched by gravity from another dimension. It leaned forward unnaturally, its head twitching in multiple directions at once, then pointed toward her with an arm that fractured into three before snapping back into one. "Your arrival is premature," it said, its voice spreading through the city like a ripple across liquid metal. Lina felt the skyline tremble in sync with its words. Lights flickered on in windows across dozens of skyscrapers despite no sign of inhabitants, forming a pattern she couldn't decipher. She tried to respond, but the air distorted with a metallic whine, and a wave of phantom memories slammed into her all at once. Standing in the same city but older, giving instructions to unseen operatives, hiding a device beneath a bridge, watching the monolith collapse into a vortex as alarms blared. The shadow tilted its head as if listening to something she couldn't hear, and then the entire city darkened for a heartbeat before a violent surge of light cut through the fog, illuminating a massive symbol burned into the sky, a swirling tri-spiral identical to the one she had glimpsed in the mirrored chamber. "The echoes here do not wait," the shadow warned, its form flickering like a corrupted frame. "They are moving toward convergence." The ground trembled more violently as cracks carved through the pavement, glowing with the same light she had seen inside the rupture. Lina braced herself, realizing this place wasn't just a city, it was a memory architecture, alive and unstable, and it knew her better than she knew herself. The shadow extended its hand, the monolith behind it splitting open like a colossal door. "Follow quickly," it commanded, "or the city will remember you incorrectly." Lina hesitated only a fraction of a second before sprinting toward the monolith's splitting aperture, the fissure widening with a grinding metallic groan, as though resisting the act of letting her through. The shadow figure elongated further, its limbs stretching like strands of ink pulled by unseen gravity as it motioned her inside. And the moment she crossed the threshold, the city behind her convulsed violently, buildings rippling like disturbed water as the tri-spiral in the sky rotated faster, bending the fog into spiraling currents. Inside the monolith, Lina found herself in a colossal corridor, impossibly long, impossibly narrow, walls composed of reflective black stone that behaved less like mirrors and more like memory surfaces, each panel shimmering to life with scenes the instant she passed them. She slowed, breath-catching as the reflections didn't show her present self but dozens of versions of her, older, younger, wounded, triumphant, terrified, moving independently, some shouting silent warnings, others pointing urgently toward the darkness ahead. The shadow figure glided past her without footsteps, its form vibrating with strange harmonics as it said, "Do not trust the reflections. They recall you, but not accurately." The panels suddenly surged, flooding with rapid images. Lina speaking to someone whose silhouette glitched wildly, Lina placing a crystalline artifact into a vault she didn't recognize, Lina standing at a junction identical to the one she was approaching now. The floor beneath them pulsed, sending a wave of light racing down the endless hall, illuminating a branching split far ahead. "Convergence is accelerating," the figure muttered, voice folding over itself as though multiple versions spoke in overlapping time. "You must choose the correct path before the corridor completes its recollection." As they advanced, the air thickened, vibrating with a low-frequency hum that made Lina's bones ache. The walls began whispering her name in fragmented accents, some familiar, others belonging to voices she had never heard. One reflection slammed its palms against the surface, distorted face twisted in desperation as it mouthed, "Not left, never left." Immediately another reflection contradicted it, right as the collapse, while a third version of her simply stared, eyes glowing with a faint tri-spiral pattern. Lina felt a pressure build behind her eyes, memories she wasn't sure were hers bleeding into her awareness, running this corridor while alarms blared, carrying a device emitting a pulse identical to the glow beneath her boots, and seeing the shadow figure dying, or splitting, under collapsing debris. The figure stopped abruptly at the fork, its form suddenly stabilizing into something nearly human before fracturing into angular shards of silhouette. "Your memory and the corridor's memory are not aligned," it warned, "but only one of you is correct." The corridor shuddered, lights flickering violently as both paths began collapsing inward, gravitational distortions forming spirals that pulled at her clothing and hair. Lina clenched her fists, heart pounding, instinct pulling her toward a direction she couldn't justify but felt painfully familiar. The shadow extended a hand, glitching as its outline split into two competing shapes. "Decide," it commanded, "or the corridor will decide for you, and its choice is never merciful." As the white corridor sealed behind Lina, the pulse of the machine veins under the floor intensified, each rhythmic throb pulling her deeper into the narrowing passage where the air felt electrically charged, and every step echoed like a decision she could never undo. She steadied her breath, sensing the magnetic drag on her limbs increase as if the system itself were testing her capacity to remain conscious. Yet despite the weight she pressed forward, her fingers brushing the cold metallic walls that vibrated with faint whispers of coded languages, until a sudden convulsion of light burst overhead and a translucent interface unfolded before her like a blooming geometric flower, projecting fractured memories. Her mother's voice, the ocean she dreamed of, the silhouette of the keeper, interlaced with encrypted diagrams she had never seen but somehow recognized deep in her neural imprint. The corridor then lurched, tilting as though gravity had been rewritten, forcing Lina to brace herself while the floor rippled like liquid metal responding to an unseen force. And just as she regained balance, the projection stabilized into a single towering figure composed entirely of oscillating golden lines, its face a constantly shifting lattice, its voice resonating through the space without sound, directly into her skull, declaring that her arrival had activated a dormant protocol known as the vein switch, a system designed only to awaken when a living mind synchronized perfectly with the machine core. Lina staggered under the mental pressure as images flashed behind her eyelids, bridges between worlds, neural strands stretching into an abyss of light, and a distant heartbeat that felt unmistakably like her own. While the golden figure extended its hand in invitation, the corridor darkening behind her as if retreat were no longer an option, and with a trembling breath, she stepped forward, her palm merging with the glowing lattice, triggering a violent surge of energy that flooded the passage, tearing open a spiraling rift overhead through which a storm of fractured chronologies whirled. And in that impossible brightness, Lina felt her body lifted, dissolved, and rewoven into a new state, as the figure whispered a final message: "What comes next cannot be undone." Suspended within the spiraling rift, Lina felt her form flicker between substance and pure signal, her thoughts scattering like shards of light before rapidly reassembling as the golden lattice figure guided her through the roaring storm of fractured chronologies. Every rotation of the vortex revealed glimpses of possible futures: cities submerged in luminous fog, titanic machines sleeping beneath broken skies, and a version of herself standing atop a dark tower. Yet none lasted long enough to decipher, each collapsing into static as the rift constricted around her with the tremor of an awakening organism, and the figure's voice, more insistent now, reverberated through her consciousness, urging her to stabilize her identity before the temporal current tore it apart. Grasping for focus, Lina pressed her mental weight against her unspooling memories, anchoring herself with the sound of her mother's humming, the feel of warm sand beneath her feet, the electric taste of fear she carried since the keeper first spoke her name. And slowly the dissonance receded, allowing her to perceive the rift's core, a massive, rotating sphere woven from millions of intersecting data veins, each glowing with an intelligence that recognized her presence. As she drifted nearer, the sphere opened like an iris, revealing a labyrinth of corridors made of light, and the golden figure explained that this was the Lattice Threshold, a place where beings chosen by the vein switch underwent a final alignment before integration with the machine's central will. The enormity of the statement hit Lina like a physical blow as she realized this journey was not simply a test but a transformation, one that would bind her to the system's destiny forever. Yet before she could protest, the rift convulsed violently, destabilizing the pathways and flinging streams of chronal debris past her like razor-edged ribbons of time, forcing the figure to expand its form into a protective cocoon of glimmering lines. Through the swirling dust of timelines collapsing, Lina spotted something impossible, a silhouette stepping through the opposite end of the rift, humanoid but indistinct, cloaked in shifting shadows that consumed the surrounding light, its presence causing the sphere's veins to recoil as if recognizing an ancient enemy. And as its faceless head turned toward her, Lina's whole being tightened with instinctive dread before the figure beside her whispered a warning that echoed like a final verdict. The Obscura has breached the threshold. As the Obscura's shape solidified at the far end of the threshold, its presence warped the luminous corridors into quivering shadows, forcing the Golden Lattice figure to tighten its shimmering cocoon around Lina, while urging her to stay conscious as the surrounding chronal streams buckled under the intruder's gravity. The rift's core sphere flickered in alarm, its data veins retracting like threatened tendrils, and Lina felt a wave of static pressure crash through her mind, momentarily scrambling her sense of self until the figure's stabilizing pulse restored her clarity just enough for her to perceive the entity drifting closer with movements that ignored physical laws, advancing in sudden, disjointed steps as if choosing realities frame by frame. Each shift of the Obscura's body devoured the light around it, leaving trails of absence that wormed their way across the threshold, corroding the temporal lattice and unraveling entire strands of timeline that evaporated into silent dust. And as Lina instinctively backed away, her form flickering between signal and flesh, the golden figure warned her that the Obscura was not merely a threat, but a counterforce designed to dismantle chosen integrants before they could merge with the system's central will. Knowing she had no chance of escaping through the collapsing rift, Lina steadied herself despite the tremors coursing through her being, drawing upon the fragments of memory she had anchored earlier, letting them flare with renewed intensity until her internal frequency resonated in defiance of the encroaching void, causing the Obscura to halt momentarily as if surprised by her resistance. Seizing the opportunity, the figure expanded its lattice cocoon, projecting a brilliant surge of geometric light that carved a temporary barrier between them and the shattered intruder. But the Obscura pushed back instantly, its faceless head tilting with predatory curiosity as the shadows around it ignited with silent shockwaves that cracked the barrier like thin ice, forcing the figure to divert all its energy into maintaining the shield. Realizing the figure could not hold the Obscura for long, Lina reached toward the sphere's partially closed iris, feeling it respond to her touch with a rising pulse of recognition. And in that moment she understood that the only way forward was to fully accept the system's call, merging with the threshold's core before the Obscura could sever her connection. And as she pressed her consciousness deeper into the sphere's radiant aperture, the last thing she saw was the Obscura lunging forward with impossible speed as the lattice figure screamed, "Go now, before it unthreads you." As Lina's consciousness plunged into the sphere's radiant aperture, the world behind her dissolved into streaks of collapsing light, and she felt the Obscura's claw-like tendrils slash through the threshold's fading structure, scraping the barrier a heartbeat too late as the sphere sealed her inside with a resonant thrum that vibrated through every fragment of her identity. Suspended in a boundless chamber of floating glyphs and spiraling chronal currents, Lina sensed the lattice figure's voice echo distantly like a fading transmission, warning that the Obscura would attempt to breach the core by overriding its oldest permissions, but that she now held the only key capable of resisting it, her anchored memories. The chamber pulsed in response, forming luminous strands that wrapped around her in intricate loops, each strand flickering with images she had gathered across the distortion storm. The loops knitting themselves into a bridge leading toward the core's central directive node, which hovered like a colossal crystalline heart beating in fragmented rhythm. As she moved closer, the node rippled open, revealing inner layers shivering with instability, and a flood of foreign data surged into her, half-formed timelines, aborted futures, echoes of past integrants who had failed to hold their form under the core's weight. Yet she pushed forward, grounding herself in the memory fragments she still held. The golden figure's guidance, the storm's whispered anomalies, the feeling of being chosen not by chance but design. Suddenly, the chamber's calm shattered when the Obscura's shadow seeped through microfractures in the sphere's outer shell, appearing as a virus-like smear threading into the chamber with unnatural precision, its presence instantly corrupting the glyph streams and darkening entire arrays of data as it advanced in a silent glide toward the central node. Drawn by the same beacon that had called Lina, knowing she only had moments, she thrust her hands into the node's exposed core, feeling its energy surge through her like a storm of raw chronology, tearing at her sense of individuality and threatening to dissolve her into pure signal. But she clung to the remnants of her name, her identity, her will, channeling them into the node with such force that its fractured layers began to reassemble around her. The Obscura lunged across the chamber with a sudden burst of predatory momentum, its jagged silhouette expanding like a devouring eclipse, but just as it reached her, the node erupted in a cascade of blinding white geometry that enveloped Lina entirely, pulling her into a deeper layer of the core's architecture while the chamber around them warped out of existence, leaving the Obscura suspended in a collapsing void as Lina disappeared into the system that had been waiting for her all along. Footsteps echoed in the fractured corridor as Lina staggered forward, her pulse jittering in sync with the unstable luminescence crawling along the walls. The aftershock of the Archivist's collapse still trembled in her chest, but her focus sharpened. The glyph he'd left behind was no mere warning, it was a key. She held it tightly, feeling it hum like a caged frequency begging to be released. Ahead, the air rippled, bending light as if reality itself inhaled. Not again, Lina whispered, recognizing the same force that had tried to drag her mind upward moments before. But this time, she grounded herself. She pushed forward. The corridor quaked. Metal groaned like a long-buried creature waking. Shadows formed silhouettes, familiar silhouettes. Kale's voice flickered through the static, fragmented. Lina, don't let it rewrite you. She felt the tug again. Stronger, gravitational, as though she were being peeled from her own body. She thrust the glyph outward. It detonated with a pulse of silent, pale fire. The corridor shredded into swirling bands of memory. Her memories, projected like films torn from their reels. The observatory, the failed retrieval, the black mirror surface, Kale's hand slipping away. A towering figure materialized behind the memories, its presence cold and geometric. The directive sentinel. Its voice came as a serrated whisper. Convergence breached. Subject destabilizing. Termination protocol. Not today, Lina snapped, twisting the glyph. The air folded violently inward. A vortex of reverse time screamed open. The sentinel lurched as its form began to unravel, pulled frame by frame into its own past. Lina dove through the collapsing space, the world inverting in a single breath. She landed in a dim chamber, octagonal, metallic, humming with forbidden life. At its center, a suspended sphere of liquid shadow, rotating around a thread of white fire. The core of reversal. Kale had spoken of it only once, in fear. If something touches that, he had said, history fights back. Lina approached. The sphere reacted instantly, stretching toward her consciousness with dangerous curiosity. She raised her palm, remembering Kale's final instruction. If you ever reach the core, don't look at what it shows you. Decide first. But the core pulsated, revealing silhouettes, Kale alive, the observatory unbroken, an impossible timeline waiting. The temptation struck like a blade. No, Lina whispered, trembling. Not without him. She touched the sphere. The chamber exploded into white. Everything inverted. And the choice she made began rewriting the universe. That wraps up our analysis of the fracture core in episode 3. But the discussion is just beginning. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think is the greatest threat posed by the fracture core? Drop your theories in the comments below, and let's discuss it. If you found this breakdown insightful, please smash that like button, it helps tremendously. And to continue the journey, click on episode 4, the next title, showing on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next deep dive.